Good morning, America. I'd like to thank Gil for the fine introduction, and I'd like to thank Tony Perkins for organizing this whole event. Doesn't he do a great job? It's great to be among so many fellow Americans who believe that we get our freedom from God. Recently, some conservatives have been referring to the extreme leftists as loony left. Now, as compassionate conservatives, I think it would be nice of us to help explain things to them that they don't seem to understand. For example, they can't understand how they lost the election. Well, I think maybe we could start off by explaining how they lost the election. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. How many of us, now you have to be truthful, said a prayer that God would bless our country by electing the right person for president? There, loony left, there's the answer. Many of you have asked me why I started AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. About 10 years ago, what motivated me are probably the same reasons that many of you are here today. We love our country. We love America. And we want to preserve it for our children and our grandchildren and generations to come. Unfortunately, I became more and more aware that there are other people who didn't believe as we do. At first, I thought, oh, well, okay, they look at things differently. After all, that's part of our freedom, isn't it? Then things began to change drastically. Nothing like what is happening today has ever happened before in our country. The people who disagree with us, they want to tear down our traditional American values. They want to fundamentally change not only our way of life, they don't want to defend our Constitution, they want to ignore it. When Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg said, when she was asked about our Constitution, she said, well, if I were starting a new nation, I would use the Constitution of South Africa as a model. Who would have ever thought we would have a Supreme Court justice who didn't believe that our Constitution was the greatest instrument to govern people ever created by man? Too many people are sworn in today, and they take the oath to defend our Constitution, but they have no intention of defending our Constitution. Look at some of our judges. And by having people like that in office, we are slowly losing our rights one by one. When our first 3 children graduated at the high school ceremony, we always had a priest, a rabbi, or a minister say a blessing for their future. When our 4th child graduated, we didn't have that. So I asked the vice principal, I said, how come we didn't have a benediction or a blessing of our children? He said, well, some parents complained. I said, some? He said, well, a parent complained and said that it was a violation of the separation of church and state. So we didn't want to have a legal problem, so they gave in. The school didn't stand up for our rights, and the rest of us went along with it. Except, how many people here have read the Constitution? Wow, wow. Then you know what I know, that in the Constitution, nowhere does it say separation of church and state. It's not in there. As a matter of fact, what it says is, no law can be passed to restrict the practice of religion. No one is supposed to restrict the practice of religion, but that's what the courts have been doing. Just last week, they ruled that a board of commissioners couldn't say a prayer. And the reason they couldn't say a prayer was because they were all Christians. And they would only say, each commissioner would take a turn saying the prayer. And before that, they had some Jewish people and other faiths. But once they became all Christian, then they're only going to say Christian. Well, that's spreading Christian religion. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. And we've got to stand up so that wouldn't happen. So that's one of the reasons I said, I'm not going to stand by idly and let them start taking away our rights. I'm not going to do it. So we started AMAC, and thank God we're growing. We have 1 million members, and it's more than that. I think 1,300,000 now. Thank you. However, soon after we formed AMAC, things got even worse. We elected a president who proudly announced he did want to fundamentally change the way we lived in America. We didn't know what he meant by that, but we sure know now, don't we? Over the last 8 years, people in his administration did exactly that, try to change us fundamentally. They dictated how Americans would receive health care. They made promises and then proceeded to break them one by one. We were promised medical insurance would decrease by $2,500 a year. Instead, it increased, it doubled in most cases, doubled. We were told everyone would have health insurance, but today in America, 29 million Americans have no health insurance at all. 29 Americans uninsured. So the next time someone tells you that Obamacare isn't that bad, ask them how many people still have no insurance. And I think they'll be surprised. And that's part of the media. Has the media ever said anything about 29 billion? No. And that's part of the problem, and that's another thing that we started with AMAC. We have a magazine that goes to 800,000 people, and we said we got to fight the media, we got to get the people educated. When President Obama was Senator Obama, he said, you remember this? I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I am not in favor of gay marriage. That's a typical way that the loony left operates. They mislead. So he didn't tell us his true feelings, but soon after he did, he started to say, well, my feelings about gay marriage is evolving. So we were deliberately misled, and I could say if you read the media, we were misread. What else in America has changed? Well, when President Eisenhower was in office, America was the greatest economic power in the whole world. We were the strongest military power by far. And we were the most generous nation. Under the Marshall Plan, we gave the equivalent of $167 billion to Europe. We gave billions of dollars to China and to Japan to help them get their economies going again. But because of bad decisions by our government, we put a damper on our businesses. We increased taxes. Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. We increased regulatory burdens, and that put us at a competitive disadvantage. We made bad trade agreements like NAFTA that sent jobs to Mexico and Canada, and while they were building and opening new factories, we were closing our factories. President Trump was right when he said NAFTA was one of the worst deals in business he ever saw, with America being the loser. America used to make more cars than any country in the world. Last year, America made 15 million vehicles. China made 25 million vehicles. People are surprised, but that's what's happening. We've done the reverse. That's why we need the tax relief. We need to put more money in our workers' pockets and make our economy strong again. That's how Ronald Reagan won the Civil War, because our economy was much stronger than Russia, and now we're reversing that up until this president. Keep in mind, China holds $1 trillion of our bonds. God forbid that our adversaries use the money we owe them as an economic weapon, because we stand to lose. Last year, we had a trade deficit with China of over $300 billion. That's our wealth that we're literally transferring to China and Middle East countries. They are building weapons to use against us, and we're giving them the money to pay for it. On the home front, we haven't balanced our budget in almost 20 years. The Obama administration has doubled our debt, which now stands at $20 trillion. That debt hangs over the heads of our children and our grandchildren because they're the ones who are going to have to pay for it. Is that any way to run a government? Big government wastes a great deal of money, but the biggest waste by far is the interest rates that we must pay on the national debt. Last year, they took $475 billion of our hard-earned money just to pay the interest. And what did we get for the money? What did we get for $475 billion? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And here's what they haven't told us. The interest rates right now on our debt are 2.5%. If interest rates should go back to what was considered a normal rate of interest, 5.7%, the annual payment just to pay the interest and service on the debt would be $1 trillion a year. That's a total waste. And what do we get for that? Nothing. And since we don't have a surplus, we have a deficit, where do we get the money to pay the interest? We have to borrow it. That's like insane, but that's what our so-called leaders have left us with. And that's what AMAC is here to do something about, and that's why we need you to join us and get on our bandwagon, so when I make the visits to Congress, they open up the door, they know who I am, and they respect us. If you're standing by the shore and you notice the water in the bay starts to recede, and suddenly you notice you're looking at the bottom of the bay, what do you think is going to happen next? A tidal wave, tsunami. Well, a tidal wave is about to happen because our interest rates have been receding and nearing the bottom. And what's going to happen? We can expect a terrible tidal wave of economic devastation unless we get our house in order and get it in order soon. We got to do something now. And I ask, if you're not a member of AMAC yet, join. When I visit the halls of Congress, 4 years ago, we had 400 and some odd thousand members, and they kind of respected me, but now they know we have 1 million members, and they actually do pay attention. Let's start to balance the budget before it's too late. Sometimes you tackle a big problem with a little thing. And our little thing is similar to the 1 penny plan. I don't know if you heard about that. And what we want to do is reduce the spending, not the budget, but the spending by 0.5%, half a penny for every dollar that was spent last year in each department. The secretaries have got to cut a half a penny. And for the next 10 to 12 years, if we cut half a penny or a penny, we'll have a balanced budget and we'll begin to pay off the surplus. Does that sound like a good idea? And that's why we're different from a lot of the other organizations, especially ones that claim they represent seniors. We actually take action. We actually have solutions to the problems. We don't just say we must fix Social Security as the trust funds will run out of money in the next few years. We say we have a plan. It's called the AMAC Social Security Guarantee. And look it up on our website. It guarantees that we'll continue Social Security for the next 80 years. It guarantees that the poor people will get more money now than they're getting before, and we guarantee that there'll be extra ways to save money. We want to add a payroll deduction IRA to Social Security so folks can add their own money. And that will be invested at higher interest rates and in the market. It's up to you. It's voluntary. We have several ideas to reduce the cost of health care, something Obamacare has failed to do. And the Republican plans, what in there reduces the cost of health care? They're addressing the problem the wrong way. They're trying to juggle the money, and the answer always seems to be, well, we're going to have to raise taxes. Well, you don't have to raise taxes, just organize it. Let me give you an example. How about letting doctors treat patients pro bono, the ones who treat the patients for free, they get a tax deduction. Right? Simple. Rand Paul had that in his bill, and Congressman Sanford had that in his bill, but it was totally ignored. Now, here's how it would work. If a doctor treated 20 people a year, that's the limit, so no one scams the system, 20 people a year, and there's roughly 350,000 medical practitioners, add in nurse practitioners. We polled our members that had an MD after their membership name, and we said, would you be willing to take a tax deduction if you treat up to 20 patients. 85% said they would. Ask your own doctor that. And I was shocked that so many people said they would. Well, that would cover 7 million people. 7 million people who now are on Medicaid would get free insurance. Medicaid is crushing the state budgets, and it's killing the federal budget. So there's a simple answer, and we brought it up, and almost every office we visit, they say, that's a good idea, we'll have to look at that. So we speak to leadership, and they say, well, it's got to be a grassroots effort. So we speak to the congressman, and they say, well, I've got to follow leadership. So they give us the runaround. But I'll tell you, we're getting tougher, and they're starting to realize it. And thank you for your support. How about another simple thing? How about Teladoc? People on Medicaid, they go to the emergency room, $1,000 a pop. How about they get a card that gives them a phone number, they call a real doctor, and they tell them what's the problem. 60% of the people who go to emergency rooms, that visit could be avoided if they had Teladoc. The Teladoc call is $40. So for $40, we save almost $1,000. We've got to remind our representatives on Capitol Hill that capitalism is a good thing. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how many forget that. Like capitalism in medical care will do wonders. We got plans, I don't have enough time to talk about them. But free enterprise will, free enterprise has lifted more people out of poverty in the whole world than any other system. And yet, what are our kids being taught in school? They're being taught that socialism is okay. When the dictator Chavez in Venezuela fooled the people and was elected president of Venezuela, they were the richest nation in South America. But Chavez claimed these large companies were stealing money from the people, especially the food and agricultural business. So he had the government take over. His successor, another dictator, continued in expanding government control. If you go into Venezuela today, you'll find the shelves are empty. Empty. To give you an idea how bad things are now, the average Venezuelan has lost 19 pounds in the last 3 years. The people are starving. So teach your children what the face of socialism looks like. Please take this away from the conference if you don't take anything else away. Have them Google Venezuela starvation and tell them that's socialism. Shame on the media for not telling us about that. Shame on the college professors who won't teach the truth. They think indoctrination is more important than education. And shame on those who complain about social injustice without first taking social responsibility. When I was a senior in high school, President Kennedy was inaugurated, and he said those beautiful words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." 2 days after I graduated, I enlisted in the United States Air Force and served our nation, as many of you have done. We must instill in our children that same love of country and patriotism. There's a love of freedom and patriotism that so many of us in our country today seem to have forgotten, especially some very rich football players. So let's teach our children what others have said at this conference before me. We kneel to pray and we stand to honor our country. Right now, because of the resistance movement from the loony left, Congress has talked a lot and accomplished nothing. So it's up to us, the common people. We must take action. There is a time to ponder and there is a time to act. We must act and push Congress to cut our taxes and reduce spending. We must push Congress to guarantee Social Security. We must push Congress to replace Obamacare. In the last 7 months, I have visited over 100 congressmen and senators' office, so I ask you to stand with me as I make these demands. Will you stand up with me to fight those who want to tear down our way of life? And will you literally stand with me as I say this prayer? I ask you to stand. And I'll end my talk by saying, and please repeat with me, God bless America. Thank you, folks.